What makes a good horror story? Is it the dread as a heroine opens the door of an old haunted house? Is it the excitement of battling creatures that only come out in the dead of night? Or is it the darkness itself that lingers long after the story ends? Come with me, let's see what's been making those noises on the roof. Welcome to Shake, Rattle, and Record.
Lubusan pagkilala ano naman basta mahal kita.
Unang araw sa school, ako'y nasa eskwelahan. Uniforme ay cool, baka may maeksenahan. Syempre, merong bagong chicks ngayon nag-enroll. Kaso yung iba mukhang pang shake, rattle, and roll. Oh, pero iisa ang agaw pansin, isang babaeng kumakain.
If you remember that song, then you must have been riding jeepneys in 2012 or so. I always enjoy references to horror films like this. I also noticed another one in the 2018 film My Two Mommies, starring Paolo Ballesteros and Solen Yusuf. In the film, Paolo as Manu is talking to one of his friends and he calls someone Anundin. It's a fairly common insult among members of a certain generation, one that is probably experiencing a lot of back pain now, if you get my drift. In Classmate, the rap song in the beginning, Humbug by SAGPro uses Shake, Rattle, and Roll to describe his new classmates who are supposedly so ugly it scares him. Rap plays a role too in Shake, Rattle, and Roll 4's Madre, where Ay de las Alas stars as Astrude, an amateur rapper who demonstrates how their cariton transforms into a makeshift house. This episode opens in an urban poor area where a group of heavily made up young women are laughing about the news of a manananggal sighting. Belia Flores as Mama Monang arrives and asks them, "Why are you all so happy? Bumalik na ba ang mga kano sa Subic? Did the Americans already come back to Subic?" This throwaway line does several things. First, it tells us that the story takes place around the time of the closure of the U.S. naval base in Subic Bay. It was a defining issue, one that shaped most of the conversation in the late 80s when the American lease on the bases was about to expire. So, without even looking up the year of this movie, you know it was released in the early 90s. It was actually in theaters in December 1992, just a month after the American flag was lowered in Subic Bay. Second, it tells us that the young women are sex workers. Military based sex work is no secret. In 1990, a columnist named David Evans called it a, quote, sexual Disneyland for U.S. servicemen, where for half a century the raging hormones of countless thousands of young American military men have been quenched by prodigious quantities of alcohol and sex for hire, unquote. According to a 1990 interview with John Lugibil of the Christian Urgent Action Network for Emergency Support, quote, officially there are 6,000 entertainers in Olongapo, but the real number is closer to 16,000. The girls are required to have a checkup every 2 weeks at the Social Hygiene Center, which is funded by the U.S. Navy. The men don't have to carry such cards, unquote. Evans continued that when the mighty warships drop anchor at Subic, the women on the beach see the cruise as a way out of debt. Indeed, the women would rather spend their time with visiting sailors than servicemen assigned permanently to the bases. So, for decades, an entire industry was built around sex work. When the bases closed, it was, of course, for them a question of where the demand for these services would now come from. That's what Mama Monang is asking, essentially. There is an answer, by the way, not to go too far off topic, but in a nutshell, there was a shift not just in the Philippines, but also in the rest of Asia. The demand from military personnel became demand from civilian tourists. According to studies like Mason's 1999 article on the sex trade in Southeast Asia, it was accompanied by various government and international policy changes to encourage it, giving rise to sex tours. Eventually, the demand shifted to Japanese tourists. This is a topic for another podcast, Her Story Southeast Asia probably, so we'll leave it there for now. But certainly, this isn't something I noticed when I saw this as a child, but it really gives a lot of context when you see it as an adult. Back to the story. Ay de las Alas is back as Astrude with a rap number about their cariton that transforms into a makeshift house. If you've never seen a cariton, just picture a large rectangular wooden crate on wheels. It's typically used to cart around scrap and used bottles. But many homeless people do live in them and make their living off them. Astrude is joined by her sister, Gina Alajar, as Puri, and Puri's son, Teks, played by IC Mendoza.
Baka akala nyo, kami ay miserable pobreng kariton. Gamit ay doble-doble, may wheels ka na, may bahay ka pa, at higit sa lahat, park anywhere pa. Hindi na kailangan gumamit ng semento, hindi na kailangan gumastos pa sa yero. Simpleng-simple lang ang wheels sa bahay namin. Listen to me, I'll explain everything. Ipatong lang to, at isampay to. Instant bubong,
Hindi mo ba ako tutulungan?
di ba, Mariko? Hilahilang to. Isunod mo lang to. Instant bedroom with matching balcony. Uulitin ko. 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 Sampay-sampay. Bubong. Tapal-tapal tigdin. Hila-hila sahig. Instant condo. Yo.
Nampucha naman, Astrude. Ano ba?
This number sort of distracts us, I guess, from the sad reality of living on the streets, which is what Astrude and her family are dealing with. But it also shows us humor and resilience, which are hallmarks of the Filipino spirit. I know people don't like hearing that these days, the word resilient, but that's the best way I can describe it. Filipinos are resilient. It's just that we hope that one day we don't have to be. They share this space with some other families who are also living in makeshift houses. A neighbor, Adobe, gives them food from the money he made selling patis bottles and reminds them to make sure their cariton is secure because there's a manananggal going around. Adobe's son tells Tex that to kill the manananggal, he needs to put salt and chili on the body parts that remain on the ground. Puri wonders if the boy means garlic, not chili, but Astrid tells her garlic costs more than chili peppers. Sometime in the night, they are awoken by Adobe screaming. They hear the flapping of wings and they huddle together for several tense minutes, holding on to each other while their cariton shakes violently. When the sounds finally stop, they peek out to find Adobe and his sons dead. The next day, seemingly unshaken by the incident, Astrud and Puri go to a barangay health center to get a checkup for Tex. Astrud attempts to sell her blood, but the young and handsome volunteer doctor, Apple, tells her no, but that she can go ask Red Cross about it. Puri is irritated, but Astrud says, "At least I'm not selling my dignity," within earshot of the sex workers from earlier in this segment. This is friendly banter, though. They're actually all friends, but there's something there. Astrud then leaves for a job interview at a disco. Mama Mona reappears and asks the clinic assistant for antibiotics. He asks her, "For what?" She says, "Para sa tulo," the colloquial term for gonorrhea. So you see a theme here. It's an urban poor community struggling with a lot of health and safety issues, relying on volunteers to help them out. Puri thanks Dr. Apple, played by the late Miguel Rodriguez, for volunteering in their area despite the rumors about the manananggal. The doctor replies he doesn't believe in these things. Puri says, "No, it's true. We saw the dead bodies last night." The nun assisting in the clinic, Aiko Melendez as Sister Mary John, dismisses Puri's claim. She emphatically explains to everyone that it's people who should be feared, not fictional monsters. She has the sort of kind face and calming voice that draws people in. The residents try to tell her the manananggal is real, but they suddenly become very quiet. What do they see? Find out after the break.
The truth, they say, is out there. Trouble is, the truth sometimes can be bland and uninteresting. Subscribe to Dark Theory. Dark Theory is a self-produced Filipino podcast that takes you down a rabbit hole of mystery, conspiracy, and dark, twisted tales that blur the boundaries of what you know to be real. Subscribe to A Little Darkness Listen to Dark Fury, available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Anchor.
A gray haired old woman walks in and hands Dr. Apple a plastic bag. Over the years, this woman would become known as the queen of Philippine horror movies, and she actually appears in three Shake, Rattle, and Roll segments. Even if you don't know her name, I'm pretty sure you already have an image of her in your head. This is, of course, Lilia Condapay. Here, she plays Aling Iya, a newcomer to the area who everyone suspects to be an aswang. Puri tells them not to judge, but Mama Mona says she looks like a manananggal, so there can be no doubt about it. Sister Mary John stares at her disappointedly as she walks away. Back in the Cariton, someone who sounds very much like Mike Enriquez explains what a manananggal is on the radio.
At yan po ang ating caller sa araw na ito. Nagtatanong po kung paano raw po mahuhuli ang manananggal at kung merong manananggal. Alam mo, Iha, ang alam ko sa manananggal ay nahati yan sa dalawa, no? Ang katawan. At kapag nahati pa yan sa dalawa, magiging 4 na yan. At kapag nahati pa yan, magiging 8 na yan. Kapag nahati na yan, darami na yan. Pero seryoso na tayo.
Astrude arrives with good news. She's been hired as a rapper at the disco bar. That night, Teks is spooked by Aling Iya. They all go out to investigate. Astrude and Puri find the manananggal in the flesh, tangled up in an antenna sticking out of someone's roof. Tex goes in the opposite direction and finds the manananggal's lower half. Astrude and Puri run from the manananggal and see a plastic bag similar to the one they saw Aling Iya carrying. It's just filled with clothes and food. Then they find Tex nearby and all seems well. The next day, Tex hears people arguing in an old warehouse. He goes near it to investigate and sees Sister Mary John fleeing the scene, fixing her wimple and licking her fingers as she went. Back at the Barangay Health Center, residents are talking about a family that was massacred by the Manananggal at midnight about 5 streets away. Puri says that's impossible because they saw the Manananggal stuck in the antenna at the same hour. They're unable to flesh out this train of thought, though, because suddenly, outside, Mama Mona is brandishing a kitchen cleaver and leading a mob. Or at least it was a kitchen cleaver in the first scene, but when she's shown again, 30 seconds later, she's holding a bolo knife. So I guess she upgraded. To make it even more confusing, someone comments, Mama Monang is holding a palakol. That means axe, and neither of these things are axes. This is a weird thing to fixate on, but anyway, I posted the screenshots on Twitter. Mama Monang leads the mob to Aling Iya's house, where they threaten to murder her for the Manananggal's crimes. They beat her up really badly until the doctor puts a stop to it. The scene is honestly heartbreaking. The bloody old woman crawls away from the mob, never uttering a single sound. The doctor reveals to the mob that the reason Aling Iya walks around at night is to leave clothes and food for those who need it. Then he lectures them about judging people on outward appearances. Nearby, Sister Mary John is watching the scene with an amused expression, with blood on her tongue. That's the cover photo. Tex actually recognizes her as the Manananggal, but Puri tells him to shut up. But Tex will not have this. He's convinced that Sister Mary John is the Manananggal. He walks to the disco bar that Astrude works at and steals the closest thing he could find to chili peppers, bottles of hot sauce.
Kung ang puso ay laging malungkot at buhay ay laging may gusto, mukha mo ay wag mo ikukunon. You know what you should do, darling. You should smile. Ganito yon, don't let them know you wanna cry.
He also scrapes salt off the pavement after somebody, I think Giselle Sanchez, drops it while eating balut. This very resourceful kid, IC Mendoza, will grow up to star in three more Shake, Rattle, and Roll segments and also play Paula in the 2016 movie Die Beautiful. We are near the end of this segment now. Tex, armed with salt and hot sauce, drags Astrude back to where he found the Manananggal's lower half. They watch as Sister Mary John rubs oil on her body, probably the same type of oil Irma Alegre had in the previous episode. She grows talons and drools as fangs sprout in her mouth. Finally, bat like wings push out of her back as her upper half separates from the lower half. She shrieks. Then she spots Astrude and Tex, who run for their lives. Astrude stalls her and tells Tex to run. He does, but he runs right back to the lower half where he proceeds to pour the salt and hot sauce into the intestines. Again, it begins to bubble, smoke, and melt. Puri swats at the manananggal while Tex crawls into a pipe where she can't reach him. Astrud is bloody and injured but manages to deliver another joke. Puri stabs the manananggal from behind and Tex squirts hot sauce right into her face. The manananggal goes out in a literal bang and burns as she flutters to the ground. The sun is rising now, and Puri and Tex are trying to find help for Astrud when, in the distance, they see another lower half. They hear wings flapping up ahead. Tex goes to put hot sauce on it while Puri yells at the second manananggal, who is actually Dr. Apple, the handsome volunteer doctor from the beginning. Puri squirts hot sauce at him, which works. Then the sun hits the second manananggal like a spotlight and he dies. I think they used a literal spotlight. The sun fully rises, Puri and Tex hug, we assume Astrud lives, and the segment ends. This isn't one of my favorite segments. Truthfully, what I remembered most from this was the hot sauce thing because when I was a child, I thought that was a good plan. I have hot sauce. The themes on the outside are pretty straightforward. Appearances can be deceiving, but there are a couple of very interesting things true about this segment. First, I noticed that there were actually no authority figures shown besides the doctor and the nun who turned out to be the villains of the story. Even when the mob was attacking Aling Iya, there were no police and no barangay tanods. The government was completely absent from their lives. I think that was a conscious decision because it is a statement on how the urban poor largely need to fend for themselves. In situations of violence, whether from the manananggal or something more worldly or mundane, the urban poor need to rely on each other much more than they do on the state. There is no outright mistrust of the police in the segment. There are a couple of times when someone mentions calling them, but they never show up. Instead, the villain is defeated by two women and a child living in a kariton, armed with nothing but guts and resourcefulness. Second, this is one of the very few depictions of a male manananggal on film. I actually can't think of another one, so let me know if you've seen another example. There was a mention of manananggal actors and actresses in the 1927 silent film by Don Jose Nepomuceno, the one I talked about in the previous episode, but there doesn't seem to be any surviving footage. There's apparently a male counterpart to the manananggal known as the iki. Take this with a grain of salt, pun intended, because I can't find many reliable sources for it. However, Dr. Apple isn't an iki because it's said that the iki separates at the knees and we clearly saw his intestines. Shake, Rattle, and Roll 4, ng Madre, effectively brings this mythological creature out of the woods and into our towns and cities, leaving us to think that the things we fear are never really that far away. Next time on Shake, Rattle, and Record, we're going on a trip with Manalyn Reynes to her best friend's hometown for the annual fiesta. It would be very rude to refuse. This is your host, the government agent assigned to monitor your internet activity. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to follow Shake, Rattle, and Record on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at SRR Podcast. I'm Agus Ramirez. Scare you next time.